High heels are one of the most popular shoes of this day and age, but where did they come from? I do not know. But if we go back in time, we can find out. The year is 3500 BC in ancient Egypt. This is the first pair of shoes to resemble our modern day high heels. Now I know resemble may be a strong word there, but look at this. It has a high heel. Now I know we all have one question. Who wore these shoes? Was it nobility of the time, or possibly fashion icons, or it was just butchers. Butchers wore these shoes. Now I know that may not surprise a lot of you, seeing as butchers are responsible for the bulk of the work in the fashion industry nowadays, but these shoes actually have a practical reasoning behind them. You see here how it's raised above the ground? Turns out butcher's work has a lot of byproducts, and those byproducts get messy, so these shoes were invented to keep the butcher's feet out of the mess. Later, nobles also wore sandals for ceremonial purposes, but that's not as cool, so we don't really care. Now, unfortunately, the Egyptians never really took high-heeled shoes past this point, so to see our next example of a high-heeled shoe, we have to jump ahead in the future another few hundred years. I'll see you in a second. Here we are in ancient Greece. See the Parthenon over there? That's because we're here for real. Look, I can throw this rock. I can throw this rock at it. Ugh. Anyway, the ancient Greeks were very similar to the ancient Egyptians in a lot of ways. And by that, I mean they both had high-heeled sandals. But look, they made some major improvements on the design. You see this? That's a strap. That's a proper strap. You see this here? That is a cork heel. Some pretty quality stuff right there. The other difference is that these heels were used for more tasteful activities, that being the theater. The ancient Greeks actually used these heels in their plays to signify characters that were of a higher social class or more important to the production. Unfortunately, the ancient Greeks also decided to not really use this as a fashion statement very much, so to see our next example, we have to go another few hundred years into the future. So let's go to our next stop. Welcome to Persia. This is where the modern day high heel originates. Starting in the 10th century, Persian cavalrymen wore a form of high heel called galesh to better secure their feet in the stirrups when riding their horses. Take a look at the shoe. A closed toe, proper heel cutout. We're getting pretty close to modern day high heels. By the end of the 16th century, Persian noblemen had adopted heels as a fashion item, often wearing them in extravagant colors and extravagant materials. Also at this time, Shah Abbas I, the leader of Persia, just happened to have the largest cavalry in the world. He also just happened to want to destroy the Ottoman Empire. So what did he do? Well, in 1599, he sent out a diplomatic mission to the courts of Russia, Spain, and Germany. Now, what does this have to do with high heels? Well, it turns out you can't really send out a diplomatic mission without showing off just a little bit. And Shah Abbas I, he really wanted to show off his fashion prowess. This diplomatic mission created a wave of interest all across Western Europe, with aristocrats from all over adopting the high heels to influence and increase their masculine image. Over time, the lower classes slowly started to adopt the high-heeled fashion of the aristocrats, and in response, the aristocrats raised their heels to levels previously unseen. These new heels were useless in the muddy, filthy, bumpy, dirty streets of 17th century Europe, which made it perfect for showing off your social status. In the 1630s, a fashion trend appeared amongst women to masculinize their outfits. First, this started with cutting their hair and then adding epaulettes to their outfit, which is this thing. I didn't know what it was either. Then it led to smoking pipes, and finally, high heels. In no time, it became normal for women to wear high heels, with a unisex shoe fashion emerging until about the mid to late 17th century, when trends began to take a turn. The unisex heel of the mid 17th century diverged into two categories: thinner, smaller heels for women, and larger, thicker soles for men. By the late 1780s, the difference was clear. The thinner, higher heels were meant for women and reserved for their femininity and extravagance, whereas the thicker soled boot-style heels were reserved for men and represented men. 30 years later, high heels went out of fashion. Ankles were safe once again. That is, until 1860, when suddenly they surged back into the fashion spotlight, with many styles of heel seen today, such as the Pinetto and Cromwell heel, first making an appearance. Combined with the new efficiency that the recently popularized sewing machines brought, these heels suddenly were produced on a mass scale, much cheaper than they ever had been before. It seemed like nothing could stop the spread of heels. Now it was until the World Wars happened. With materials such as rubber and leather needed for the war efforts, the production of heels was greatly reduced, and they had to find alternative materials to make them with. Once the wars were over, the new levels of globalization allowed the fashion of the West to spread to countries all across the world. This era also strengthened the gendered idea of heels even further, with heels being associated for professionalism for women, and heels making a comeback for men in the form of thick-soled riding boots. Today, we still see this large distinction between the heels we wear, with women's shoes often being delicate and impractical, whereas men's heels are more focused on practicality and that same boot style that keeps coming back. We are, however, seeing a large increase in the amount of people wearing whatever they want and resisting the gendered aspect of clothing. So maybe in another few decades, we'll all be wearing heels again. Or maybe no heels at all. I know doctors would probably like that a lot. Okay, so that's pretty much the entire history of high heels. At least all that I cared to research about. Bye.